In a way, the sugar-producing cells in leaves are like tiny factories with assembly lines. In a factory, different workers with separate jobs have to work together to put together a finished product. Similarly, in photosynthesis, many different chemical reactions, enzymes, and ions work together in a precise order to make the sugars that are the finished product. Chapter 4, Section 3, Photosynthesis in Detail. Key concept. Photosynthesis requires a series of chemical reactions. Main ideas. The first stage of photosynthesis captures and transfers energy. And the second stage of photosynthesis uses energy from the first stage to make sugars. First main idea. The first stage of photosynthesis captures and transfers energy. In Section 2, you learned a summary of photosynthesis. However, the process is much more involved than that general description might suggest. For example, during the light-dependent reactions, that light energy is captured and transferred in the thylakoid membranes by two groups of molecules called photosystems. The two photosystems are called Photosystem 1 and Photosystem 2. The light-dependent reactions are the photo part of photosynthesis. During the light-dependent reactions, chlorophyll and other light-absorbing molecules capture energy from sunlight. Water molecules are broken down into hydrogen ions, electrons, and oxygen gas. The oxygen is given off as a waste product, and sugars are not made during this part of photosynthesis. The main functions of the light-dependent reactions are to capture and transfer energy. In these reactions, energy is transferred to electrons. The electrons are only used for energy in a few specific processes. Recall a time when you went to an amusement park. To go on rides, you needed special tickets that you could only use there. Similarly, the electrons are used for energy during photosynthesis, but not for the cell's general energy needs. Energy from the electrons is used to make molecules that act as energy carriers. These energy carriers are ATP and another molecule called NADPH. The ATP from the light-dependent reactions is usually not used for a cell's general energy needs. In this case, ATP molecules, along with NADPH molecules, go on to later stages of photosynthesis. In Photosystem 2, chlorophyll and other light-absorbing molecules in the thylakoid membrane absorb energy from sunlight. The energy is then transferred to electrons. As the image on the screen here suggests, Photosystem 2 needs water to function. Stage 1. Energy absorbed from sunlight. Chlorophyll and other light-absorbing molecules in the thylakoid membrane absorb energy from sunlight. The energy is then transferred to electrons. High-energy electrons leave the chlorophyll and enter an electron transport chain, which is a series of proteins in the membrane of the thylakoid. Stage 2. Water molecules split. Enzymes break down water molecules. Oxygen, hydrogen ions, which are represented by H+, and electrons are separated from each other. The oxygen is released as waste. The electrons from the water replace those electrons that left chlorophyll when energy from sunlight was absorbed. Stage 3. Hydrogen ions transported. Electrons move from protein to protein in the electron transport chain. Their energy is used to pump H+ ions from outside to inside the thylakoid against a concentration gradient. The H+ ions build up inside the thylakoids. Electrons move on to Photosystem 1. In Photosystem 1, chlorophyll and other light-absorbing molecules in the thylakoid membrane also absorb energy from sunlight. The energy is then added to electrons, some of which enter Photosystem 1 from Photosystem 2. Stage 4. Energy absorbed from sunlight. As in Photosystem 2, chlorophyll and other light-absorbing molecules inside the thylakoid membrane absorb energy from sunlight. Electrons are energized and leave the molecules. Stage 5. NADPH produced. The energized electrons are added to a molecule called NADP+, forming a molecule called NADPH. In photosynthesis, NADP plus functions like ADP, and NADPH functions like ATP. The molecules of NADPH go to the light-independent reactions. The final part of the light-dependent reactions makes ATP. The production of ATP depends on the H+ ions that build up inside the thylakoid from photosystem 2 and on a complex enzyme in the thylakoid membrane. Stage 6. Hydrogen ion diffusion. Hydrogen ions flow through a protein channel in the thylakoid membrane. Recall that the concentration of H+ ions is higher inside the thylakoid than it is outside. This difference in H+ ion concentration is called a chemiosmotic gradient, which stores potential energy. Therefore, the ions flow through the channel by diffusion. Stage 7. ATP produced. The protein channel in step 6 is part of a complex enzyme called ATP synthase, which is actually pictured on the screen here. As the ions flow through the channel, ATP synthase makes ATP by adding phosphate groups to ADP. So here's a summary of the light-dependent reactions. Energy is captured from sunlight by light-absorbing molecules, and the energy is transferred to electrons that enter an electron transport chain. Water molecules are broken down into H+ ions, electrons, and oxygen molecules. The water molecules provide the H+ ions and electrons that are used in light-dependent reactions. Energized electrons have two functions. They provide energy for H+ ion transport, and they are added to ADP+ to form ADPH. The flow of H+ ions through ATP synthase makes ATP. And the products are oxygen, NADPH, and ATP. Oxygen is given off as a waste product, and energy from ATP and NADPH is used later to make sugars. Second main idea. The second stage of photosynthesis uses energy from the first stage to make sugars. The light-independent reactions, like the light-dependent reactions, take place inside chloroplasts, but, as the name implies, the light-independent reactions do not need sunlight. These reactions can take place any time that energy is available. The energy sources for the light-independent reactions are the molecules of ATP and NADPH formed during the light-dependent reactions. The energy is needed for a series of chemical reactions called the Calvin cycle, which is named for the scientist who discovered the process. The Calvin cycle cannot take place without the ATP and NADPH from the light-dependent reactions. The chemical reactions of the Calvin cycle use carbon dioxide, which is CO2, in gas form from the atmosphere and the energy carried by ATP and NADPH to make simple sugars. Because the light-independent reactions build sugar molecules, they are the synthesis part of photosynthesis. Only one molecule of CO2 is actually added to the Calvin cycle at a time. The simplified cycle, which is shown on the screen here, shows 3 CO2 molecules added at once. Stage 1. Carbon dioxide added. CO2 molecules are added to 5 carbon molecules already in the Calvin cycle. 6 carbon molecules are formed. Stage 2. 3 carbon molecules formed. Energy, ATP and NADPH, from the light-dependent reactions is used by enzymes to split the 6 carbon molecules. 3 carbon molecules are formed and rearranged. 3 carbon molecules exit. Most of the 3 carbon molecules stay in the Calvin cycle, but one high-energy 3 carbon molecule leaves the cycle. After 2 3 carbon molecules have left the cycle, they are bonded together to build a 6 carbon sugar molecule, such as glucose. 4. 3 carbon molecules recycled. Energy from ATP molecules is used to change the 3 carbon molecules back into 5 carbon molecules. The 5 carbon molecules stay in the Calvin cycle. These molecules are added to new CO2, carbon dioxide, molecules that enter the cycle. So, as a summary of the light-independent reactions, carbon dioxide enters the Calvin cycle. Then ATP and NADPH from the light-dependent reactions transfer energy to the Calvin cycle and keep the cycle going. Then one high-energy 3-carbon molecule is made for every 3 molecules of carbon dioxide that enter the cell. Then 2 high-energy 3-carbon molecules are bonded together to make a sugar. Therefore, 6 molecules of carbon dioxide must be added to the Calvin cycle to make one 6-carbon sugar. And lastly, the products are a 6-carbon sugar, such as glucose, NADP plus, and ADP. The NADP plus and ADP molecules return to the light-dependent reactions. Photosynthesis is much more than just a biochemical process. Photosynthesis is important to most organisms on Earth as well as to Earth's environment. Recall that plants produce food for themselves and for most all other organisms through photosynthesis. Both plant cells and animal cells release the energy stored in sugars through cellular respiration. Cellular respiration, which uses the oxygen that is a waste product of photosynthesis, is the process that makes most of the ATP used by plant and animal cells. Photosynthesis does more than make sugars. It also provides material for plant growth and development. The simple sugars from photosynthesis are bonded together to form complex carbohydrates such as starch and cellulose. Starches store sugars until they are needed for energy. Cellulose is a major part of plant structure. It is the building block of plant cell walls. Photosynthesis also helps to regulate Earth's environment. The carbon atoms used to make sugar molecules come from the carbon dioxide gas in the air, so photosynthesis removes carbon dioxide from Earth's atmosphere. This has been Chapter 4, Section 3, Photosynthesis in Detail. Key concept. Photosynthesis requires a series of chemical reactions. Main ideas. The first stage of photosynthesis captures and transfers energy. And the second stage of photosynthesis uses energy from the first stage to make sugars.